Welcome to the start of a fresh work week. This is the Daily Report for Monday, March 7th. I'm Min San-hee. Omicron continues to fuel a rampant outbreak here on the local front ahead of the country's presidential election later this week. We have details in a bit after a look at the global pandemic. Tallies, I have Kwon So standing by. So what is the latest here in Korea for this Monday?
Sunny, Korea continues to see more than 200,000 daily COVID-19 infections. And this Monday, the figure says 210,716 as of 12 a.m. And that includes 210,628 domestic transmissions and 88 cases from abroad. Now, Monday's caseload is a drop from what we had from Friday through Sunday. However, now the average number of daily cases in the past 7 days stands at above 220,000. And if we move over to our map, we see that all 17 provinces or major cities are reporting at least 4-digit figures of infections, more than 51,000 in Gyeonggi-do province, followed by close to 40,000 here in the capital, Seoul. And if we move over to the accumulated caseload, over the weekend, Korea has surpassed the 4 million mark, now standing at 4.6 million in total infections. And also with 139 additional fatalities, Korea now has surpassed 9,000 COVID-19 related deaths. And also the number of patients in severe or critical condition is gradually going up, now standing at above 900. And this has happened for the first time since early January. Now, moving over to our vaccination figures, there's just a double-digit figure of new people who got first dose over the weekend, or on Sunday, I should say, and a triple-digit who got their second shot, and a 4-digit figure, in fact, 1,675 people who got their additional dose on Sunday, and that's now 62% of the nation's population. Now, moving over to the global figures, 1.18 million new cases and a little less than 4,000 new COVID-19 related deaths. And over the weekend, there has been a milestone recorded in France, which has hit 23 million cases in total, and Italy hit 13 million in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, mounting caseloads in recent days have also led to more hospitalizations and fatalities here on the local front. For more, I have Chun Song-cho in the studio. Song-cho, welcome.
Hello, Sunny.
Right, so let's begin with an assessment of Korea's tallies in recent days, Song-cho.
Right, so as Soa mentioned earlier on, the daily tally has been declining since Friday's peak, which is typical of a weekend when fewer tests are conducted. However, despite the slight dip, the number is still in the 200,000s, and the country added 139 more COVID-19 deaths, bringing the total death toll to 9,096. The fatality rate was 0.19%. And over the past week, we've been seeing triple-digit fatalities almost on a daily basis. From February 27th to March 5th, the total accumulated deaths from COVID-19 stood at 1,013. And now, if you compare that to the figure from 2 weeks ago, 539 deaths, it's almost double. Considering the fact that it was only January 2021 when South Korea's total death toll surpassed 1,000, almost a year into the pandemic, 1,000 a week is a very concerning figure indeed. Plus, while it's particularly the elderly, 70 and above, who are dying from COVID-19, we are seeing more and more younger people succumbing to the virus as well. As for the critical cases, the number rose to 955, up 70 from a day ago. Last week, the tally stood at 761.
Right, it did. Song-cho, meanwhile, starting this past weekend, business hours have been extended to 11 p.m. at drinking, dining and entertainment establishments, right?
Yes, so authorities have moved the business curfew by 1 hour from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m., which will certainly offer a breather for small merchants in the country. To be more specific, 12 types of venues are subject to the change. The new curfew will be effective until March 20th, while the current 6-person cap on private gatherings will remain in place. Many small business owners welcome the news. However, some say they need more to be done.
It's better than nothing, but there are still a lot of complaints. Many drinking and entertainment venues still find it more difficult to do business.
Some citizens have also expressed concerns over the rising number of infections among children, many of whom are unvaccinated. They fear that with the relaxed restrictions, the infection numbers will continue to go up.
And Songju, starting on this Monday, I hear some Koreans need not hand in a negative PCR test upon arrival in the country.
Right. So starting today, it will no longer be mandatory for Korean citizens returning to the country who have been treated for COVID-19 10 to 40 days before departure to submit a negative PCR test before arrival or even before boarding a plane. All they have to do is provide documentation that shows they have recovered from COVID-19. Prior to this, from last July, it was required for all inbound travelers to submit a negative test when entering the country.
And before you go, Songju, do tell us a bit about the grievances shared by COVID-19 patients during early voting this past week.
Yes, so during the early voting weekend, there were some issues raised by people who were either in isolation or infected with COVID-19. When they took to the polling stations, they found themselves having to wait in long lines out in the cold. Various mishaps and a higher than expected turnout forced some voters to wait for more than an hour, leading to worries that their symptoms could worsen. Health authorities say they will look into ways to reduce the waiting time for the voters on election day after collecting opinions from different people.
All right, Songju, thank you for that coverage.
My pleasure.
Right, health authorities here, Soa, have pledged to expand medical support for COVID-19 patients. Tell us about that.
Right, while giving a rundown of the step-by-step easing of prevention rules, Health Minister Kwon Duk-chul this morning laid out further plans to strengthen the focus on COVID-19 patients, and one of that being another expansion of hospital beds. Let's take a listen.
We will be adding 2,275 additional beds for patients who require respiratory support in order to provide timely and sufficient treatment to elderly patients whose numbers are on the rise. Also, we'll be adopting measures for the more efficient use of hospital beds, which were previously used by ICU accommodations only, on beds for moderately ill patients and those who need respiratory support.
Kwon noted medical capacity remains at a stable level with a little under 60% of ICU beds for serious or critically ill patients in use as of Monday. The government also plans to expand medical facilities that are in charge of monitoring at-home treatment patients that need intensive care to better keep track of those at high risk. Also, 250 and 600 extra beds for mothers giving birth and dialysis patients that have been infected with COVID-19 are expected to be set aside until next week. The health minister also promised efforts to let pregnant women and dialysis patients get treated at the hospital they regularly went to.
Right, that is good to know, Soa. Now, beyond Korea, how is the rest of Asia coping with Omicron, Soa?
Well, let's start with Vietnam, which has recorded another all-time high in daily infections on Sunday with more than 142,000 infections, breaking its previous record of a little over 10,300. That should be 103,000 just the day before. The hotspot, the capital Hanoi, tallied 29,578 cases, also an all-time high for the city. Despite the surge, though, the Vietnamese government is considering to start treating COVID-19 as an endemic disease, which may also mean that daily virus cases won't be tallied anymore. The country is, meanwhile, just 2 months ahead of the 31st Southeast Asian Games that are scheduled to kick off on May 12th. It had been postponed back in November last year. India, meanwhile, appears to have overcome the worst, posting 4,362 new cases on Monday, with health officials assessing the third wave in the country has ended. The figure reportedly represents the lowest number of infections in 22 months.
And so what's the latest over in Hong Kong?
Sunny, more than 30,000 new cases were tallied on Sunday and Saturday, which is a decline from over 50,000 on the previous 3 days, but only marks a slight decline in the current trend, according to authorities, as in Hong Kong, test results usually go down during the weekend. The COVID-19 hospital occupancy rate has gone up to close to 88% as of Sunday, with 57 patients in critical and 123 in serious condition. Hong Kong also has one of the highest COVID-19 death rates in the world due to unvaccinated elderly citizens. Local officials maintain hopes, though, that zero COVID can still be achieved, with authorities announcing new measures on Sunday, such as sending more patients that are being treated for other illnesses to private facilities to stabilize the public health system.
Meanwhile, so I understand Saudi Arabia has lifted most of its COVID-19 restrictions. Tell us about that.
Right. Those are now in effect since Saturday, as Saudi Arabians no longer have to wear face masks outdoors or practice social distancing rules indoors and outdoors, that is. Now, state media have reported on Sunday and Saturday, that is, and they cited the country's interior ministry as making this decision on the back of an overall increase in vaccination rates. For Saudi Arabia, this move is significant in particular as worshippers no longer have to socially distance inside mosques, including the holy sites of Mecca and Medina. However, masks indoors are still required. A ban on inbound and outbound flights involving 17 countries has also been lifted. These easings combined are expected to give a boost to Saudi Arabia's travel industry, which largely depends on religious visits to Saudi Arabia's pilgrimage sites.
So one final question before you go. I hear there's been an intriguing study, that suggests a link between blood types and the coronavirus.
Right, Sunny. Well, actually, earlier there were already studies that have suggested whether there is a link between blood types and the coronavirus. And following that, we also reported of studies that actually said that there's no link. And now we're again seeing a study that says that a causal connection to the risk of developing severe COVID-19 determines blood groups, and that is suggesting that blood groups can play an instrumental role in whether people do develop severe symptoms of the COVID-19 virus or not. And interestingly, this recent study now supports other findings that say that the proportion of blood group A is higher in COVID-19 positive individuals. So it might suggest that people with blood group A could have developed more severe COVID-19 infections, but I guess we'll have to wait and see for more research coming out.
Right, so at the moment it's just a possible suggestion then. All right, so as always, thank you very much for the updates.
My pleasure.
Russia's brutal military campaign in Ukraine has forced hundreds of thousands to seek refuge in neighboring nations. In fact, the United Nations says over 1.5 million have fled the fighting in Ukraine. Kim Hyo-sun has our top story.
The number of Ukrainians fleeing the war to neighboring countries has swelled to 1.5 million in just 10 days. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, it's now the fastest growing refugee crisis since World War II. The UN added the civilian death toll since Russia launched its invasion against Ukraine on February 24th stands at 364. This, it said, includes over 20 children, adding hundreds more have been wounded. Amid the hostilities, Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly told his French counterpart Sunday that Moscow plans to achieve its aims in Ukraine through either diplomatic or military means. According to an unnamed French official, Putin seems very determined to achieve his objectives, including on what the Russian president again calls the, quote, denazification and neutralization of Ukraine. During a call with Turkey's president on Sunday, Putin also explained that Russia's military campaign in Ukraine is going to plan and will not end until Ukraine puts down its arms. Meanwhile, the head of European Council is insisting that imposing a no-fly zone over Ukraine would eventually trigger a full-fledged world war and is therefore not under consideration. The comments coming a day after Ukraine asked the West to establish a no-fly zone over the country. The U.S. says it's in active discussions with its European allies to ban Russian oil imports as part of further economic penalties on Moscow. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in an interview Sunday that discussions are underway while the U.S. tries to maintain a steady global supply of oil. Blinken also said the U.S. is working actively on a deal with Poland to supply Ukraine with jets. The deal could involve the U.S. providing F-16 fighters to Poland as replacements once the Poles hand over their fighter jets to Ukraine. Against this backdrop on Monday, delegations from Ukraine and Russia will reportedly hold a third round of negotiations. However, no details yet on where the talks will take place. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And a growing number of foreign companies are reviewing their operations in Russia as the international community strengthens its sanctions against Moscow. Among those companies are Korean conglomerates who are bracing for the brunt of these punitive measures. Our Song Yoo-jin explains.
With the international community slapping sanctions on Russia, South Korean companies involved in trade with the country are likely to also be affected. To start off, a total of 151 South Korean companies are currently doing business in Russia. Out of the 151 companies, 16 conglomerates manage 53 corporate bodies across Russia. Hyundai Motor Group have the most entities with 18, followed by Samsung and Lotte. In terms of location, the capital Moscow is where most South Korean companies, including LG Electronics, Samsung Electronics, Orion Manufacturing, and Uri Bank are located. Next is St. Petersburg, which is home to local representatives of Hyundai Motor, Hyundai Steel, and Lotte Hotel. In terms of sector, manufacturing makes up more than half of South Korea's foreign direct investment to Russia, with 59.5%. Car production takes up the highest proportion of the sector, followed by pharmaceuticals and food.
A lot of South Korean firms who have manufacturing companies within Russia are having a hard time. They lack a smooth supply of parts, and even if they sell their products in Russia, transactions are made with a now collapsed ruble.
Alarm bells are also ringing for South Korean trade. As of last year, Russia was South Korea's 10th largest trading partner, accounting for 1.6% of total exports and 2.8% of imports. In terms of exports, automobile and auto parts were highest with 40.6%. More than 70% of imports from Russia came from the energy sector. In the near future, South Korea and Russia's trade in terms of auto parts and cosmetics is expected to be disrupted with a surge in raw material prices and a shortage of rare gas types like krypton used for semiconductors, adding more concern. Experts say South Korean firms will have a hard time for a while, with the international community imposing stricter economic curbs on Moscow, such as expelling it from the SWIFT banking system. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, soaring inflation has become a global phenomenon according to recent findings by the OECD amid escalating oil prices, which are being aggravated by Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. Kim Sang-min reports.
High levels of inflation have now become a new reality across the globe. The latest data by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development shows that inflation in the 38 member states hit a 31-year high in January at 7.2%. While South Korea is struggling with rising inflationary pressure of above 3%, that growth was relatively mild compared to others, coming in 29th among 38 member states. The highest rate was seen in Turkey, climbing to almost 49%. The country's decision to raise the minimum wage by 50% in January, as well as higher energy and transportation costs, have sent prices up across the board. Price spirals are also looming large for the world's biggest economy, with the U.S. inflation rate hitting a 40-year high at 7.5%, calling for even stronger measures from the U.S. Fed, most likely in the form of rate hikes. While the cause of inflation differs slightly from country to country, all of them are affected by the surge in energy prices. The OECD average price for energy in January jumped more than 26% from the same period last year. That figure will only get worse through March as the war in Ukraine is adding to the already tight energy market. West Texas Intermediate crude futures topped $130 a barrel to hit a 13-year high during Sunday's session. The international benchmark Brent crude climbed to almost $140 before settling at $128. That was the highest since 2008. Experts are concerned that growing uncertainties coming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine could further drive up inflation and cripple economies.
In terms of the economy as a whole, the growing uncertainties will add to already high energy prices, which will drive down investment and therefore put a strain on the overall economy.
Experts forecast that spiking prices of energy and grains on the back of the Ukraine crisis will likely be felt starting from March. Kim Sang-min, Arirang News.
In other news, wildfires are common this time of the year here in Korea. That being said, our Cho Sung-min shares with us some of the measures to follow to ensure a safe evacuation in the case of such a scenario.
Every year, spring wildfires cause hefty damage to South Korea's rural and mountainous regions. Seasonal dry conditions make an optimal environment for even a small ember to turn into a large-scale fire, engulfing several kilometers of land in a matter of seconds. In the event of a wildfire, experts advise hikers to carefully assess where the wind is blowing from. They have a better chance of staying safe if they can first locate and move away from the fire and smoke and walk in the same direction as the wind. If there are no obvious escape routes, hikers must hide behind boulders, stay on mountain trails, or find areas already burnt or with little to no foliage, leaves, or dry branches.
Hikers must keep in mind the safe evacuation routes and trails leading down the mountain as they make their way up.
Tips for those at indoors include closing all doors and windows and pouring water around the building, which serves as a protective coating against fire. It's also helpful to remove any flammable objects from outside, including firewood, gas, and oil barrels. The Korea Forest Service also says that it's critical to follow the authorities' instructions when a fire breaks out nearby. In addition, it says wearing a wet mask or putting a soaked towel or cloth over your face can prevent inhaling smoke and suffocation. Cho Sung-min, Arirang News.
Also here in the country, drone technology is being actively adopted to facilitate emergency response efforts. Our Han Sung-woo shows us how.
Imagine autonomous drones replacing first responders dispatched to disaster zones who risk their lives, saving others in the line of duty. Such high-tech machines would have access to buildings on the brink of collapse and be able to navigate indoors, an innovation that's captivated one of Korea's leading drone labs.
Recently in Korea, there was the apartment building collapsed, right? They had some accidents. So these drones also have the camera like here. So this camera can tell, and these days, thanks to the AI, it can detect the objects. So if you are looking for some human victims, then we can recognize a human shape. So we can find the inside of building where human cannot access.
Led by Professor of Electrical Engineering Shimyeon Chol, the Unmanned Systems Research Group at KAIST equips its automated drones with lidar sensors, which shoot laser beams and measure the time it takes for the lights to travel to an object, reflect, and return. They provide the drones with distance perception, despite the lack of GPS satellite signals inside buildings, which prevent ordinary drones from flying properly.
Special system here is this lidar. This is a 2D lidar. It can scan the plane, and we have the computer, because lidar only gives you the surroundings measurement. So you have to do all the complicated mathematical computation using this computer.
Most drones will need someone behind a remote controller, but this 2D lidar drone behind me, developed by KAIST, can move on its own autonomously to deliver a water bottle to its designated location.
In the case of a collapsed building, That designated location could be a room with someone trapped under debris, dehydrated, motionless, and perhaps just minutes away from death.
By sending our unmanned drones or robots to disaster sites first, we can acquire more information on the area without risking any casualties and then deploy rescue workers later when it's deemed safe to do so.
Professor Shim hopes his lab's drones, once they're applied to real-life situations, can also later be used to improve people's daily lives in the form of entertainment and commercial services.
I like to challenge the status quo of the technology and also try to address the problem in a little bit different angle. So this indoor, many people think that drone is only flying outdoor. But I thought, why not? Why don't you fly indoor and do the drone racing or use a drone for delivery, all this kind of thing. I did a fight.
한성우, Arirang News, Busan.
Public bathhouses had been listed as high-risk facilities amid the pandemic, and this reality led to efforts to reinvent the concept of communal bathing here in the country. Do take a look.
This is a public bathhouse located in southern Seoul. This establishment has seen a sharp decline in customers amid the pandemic over fears of possible infection.
코로나 이전 대비 매출이 25%에서 30%입니다. 70% 이상 저희들은 매출이 줄은 상태이고요. 조금 줄은 게 아니라 식당이나 이런 데들은 보통 30%, 50% 줄었다고 그러는데 저희들은 70% 이상이 좀 줄었기 때문에 진짜 아사 직전의 그런 상태입니다.
The pandemic has dealt a heavy blow to Korea's bathhouse industry, which includes public baths, saunas, and hot springs, as these venues have become one of the top places to avoid amid the COVID-19 pandemic. As of 2021, there were around 400 fewer public bathhouses in Korea compared to 2019, with many of them being forced to shut down due to the pandemic. But those that have survived are doing all they can to stay afloat and save their businesses. At this bathhouse, the owner has bought his own supply of masks to hand out to customers free of charge.
입구에서 모든 손님들 마스크 착용하라고 마스크도 저희들이 사비를 들여서 다 지원을 하고 있고 방역 소독 물품도 저희들이 사비를 들여서 다 하고 있는데 과연 이게 정부에서는 곧 다음 달에 피크를 찍고 오미크론이 피크를 찍고 좀 좋아질 거로 정부에서는 기대를 하는데 실질적인 효과가 올지는 저희들도 기대 반, 걱정 반 그런 마음에서 지금 몇 달 뒤를 지금 생각하고 있습니다.
Korea has a unique bathhouse culture where visitors can get a whole body scrub down if they wish to after taking a dip, another activity that has become one to avoid due to COVID-19.
그동안 못 왔었는데요. 앞으로 좀 자주 목욕탕을 이용할 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 코로나를 통해서 자주 접하게 되지 못하는 그런 상황들이 너무 안타깝습니다.
The pandemic has also led to a growing preference for smaller and private bath areas, rather than common baths that are shared by many visitors. There are even bathhouses that now provide compartmentalized facilities for each individual guest, keeping them completely secluded from others.
미리 선택을 하실 수 있으세요. 반신욕 그리고 건식 사우나. 몸 불리는 작업하신 다음에 바로 세신 선생님 들어오시면은 세신을 진행하게 되어 있습니다.
Only one guest and a worker to help you exfoliate are in these rooms at any one time, helping to minimize any risk of possible exposure to the coronavirus.
코로나가 아니더라도 계속 이용하고 싶다고 나 혼자서 편안하게 이용할 수 있으니까 뭔가 대접받는 것 같고 지방에서 올라오신 분들이 계셨거든요. 멀리는 제주도, 대구 그리고 얼마 전에는 화성에서 택시 타고 오셨다고 하시는 어르신도 계셨어요.
The pandemic has also led to the growing sales of bathroom furniture and accessories, as people look for home alternatives to their once regular bathhouse visits. Data from an online Korean retailer has shown a sharp jump in the sale of bathroom products as of December 2020, compared to pre-pandemic levels.
감염에 대한 사람들의 민감도가 굉장히 높아졌잖아요. 따라서 이제 목욕을 할 때 어떤 소독이나 청결 혹은 위생에 대한 요구가 아마 더 높아질 거라고 생각하고 있고요. 휴식, 뭐 힐링 이런 걸 목적으로 해서 바뀌고 있다라고 생각을 하고 아마 이런 경향성이 코로나19를 통해서 더 강화될 가능성이 크고 목욕 문화도 이제 개인적인 어떤 취향을 더 반영하는 방향으로 바뀌지 않을까라고 생각을 하고 있습니다.
However, there are still many people out there who are longing to visit a public bathhouse once more. In a recent survey asking Koreans what activities they were looking forward to the most post-pandemic, a large percentage of them said they wanted to visit a public bath, a sauna, or a spa. For those looking to brave the risk of COVID-19 exposure, to relax in the soothing waters of a public bathhouse, there are a few safety precautions to bear in mind.
코로나19 유행 시기에는 가급적이면 노출을 좀 줄이시는 것이 좋을 것 같고요. 하시더라도 최소한으로 체류 시간을 짧게 해주시는 것이 좋겠고, 목욕탕 내에서 식사라든지 취식, 그리고 수면 이런 것들은 피해 주시는 게 좋겠고요. 또 감염이 돼서 어느 정도 격리된 후에 바로 직후에 목욕탕을 찾지 마시고 한 3일 정도는 마스크 착용을 잘 하고 또 어느 정도 시간이 지난 이후에 이러한 마스크를 벗는 다중이용 시설을 방문하시는 것이 좋겠습니다.
As with many other aspects of our daily lives, Korea's century-old bathhouse culture is also being forced to change and adapt to the new realities created by the pandemic.
Persevering through the pandemic amid the presence of Omicron appears to be the gist of the plan as we await its peak. For more, I have Professor Yu Byung-wook at Suncheon University. Welcome back, Professor Yu. I also have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Dr. Kim, it's good to see you again.
Good afternoon.
Professor Yu, it's been a while. Let's start off then with your assessment of Korea's current COVID-19 situation.
Well, someone said this week we can see the peak of the Omicron variant, but I cannot 100% agree about it. Because depending on the Omicron variant crisis compared to the US and other European countries than the Korea, Korean people relatively wear the mask well, and more than 18 years old, the vaccination rate is peak high. As well, we are keep on social distance measure very nicely. So this means is we're going to see the peak very slowly. So probably we are now entering of the peak, but we couldn't see it yet because we're going to see the slowly going up, and we see the plateau. Plateau is number around 250,000 cases confirmed around the 1 week or more from now on, and then probably slow down. But you know what? Omicron variants, most of young people who are fully vaccinated, even they didn't have any symptoms. They were surprised. For example, people want to be aboard, they want to do the test of the COVID-19 because only for overseas travelings. But surprisingly, we found it, they got it COVID, which means who are under the diagnosis tool, at least 2 or 3 times higher than now we have it. But anyway, peak we couldn't see yet. Probably next week we can see.
Right, I see. Dr. Kim, the sheer volume, however, of new infections at present has also led to a corresponding rise in the number of severe cases and fatalities. How concerned are you about this reality?
Well, the number of just the total infections are increasing, but then before developing the severe symptoms, we need at least just a week of interval after the symptom onset. So it's kind of some delayed kinetics. So once we just reach some high numbers of total infection, then we will see like at least a week of interval. Then we will see the increasing number of the severe patients and also the fatality. So we are seeing the effect of the increase increasing number of infection, maybe just a little more, just a while after that. And then as was already mentioned, just over the last 1 week, we have actually witnessed more than 1,000 of just a fatality in just Korea. So this is the Omicron surge. Well, some people say this is some trivial and then some minor, some disease, but this is only just true for some vaccinated people. The risk level is is very similar to that of the flu, only for the vaccinated people. But for others, for this sort of severe the patient and the fatality, mostly we are seeing from some unvaccinated people, mostly some immunocompromised patient as well.
Right, which is why vaccination is very important then.
It is.
Professor Yu, is Korea's medical arena capable of coping with the mounting caseloads at the moment?
Well, I like to put one sample, and the example to understand about very easier. If we have the big capacity of restaurants, so many the visitors expected to the good services. Yes, so in the restaurant, the capacity table is getting double. More people want to have the good meal and services. But issue is, chef and server the same number, not enough to take care of all the table. People get angry, isn't it? So hospital is the same. After the Delta variant crisis, governments, they build a rule and the new regulation taking for a more bad for the intensive care patients. But actually, yes, we did it. That's why around the 50% more of capacity we can keep on. But problem is, chef, doctors, and nurses, not enough. So we are facing the crisis in the real life. So how we can cover it actually cannot, because one doctor who take care of the care of the patient, we need at least 15 years the training course. Yes, I'm family medicine physician. Yes, I work for the COVID-19 center, but I don't have any capacity and experience to take care of patient in intensive care unit. I cannot. So which means now we have to keep our personal hygiene and social distance measure as much as possible than on other previous past 2 years. Why? There's risky groups, unvaccinated group, jumping up to their condition bad very quickly. You know what? These days, the government say around the 800 and 900 in the serious case of patients slowly going up, but there are some blind point. Why? What Dr. Kim mentioned, 3-digit number of the deaths is we are reported, which means more than 3-digit number of deaths, they give away to the bad, new number is coming up. So which means, seems like the slowly going up to capacity of intensive care unit, but this is not true. So real is now in crisis.
Right, which is why prevention would be better than cure at the moment.
Yes, right.
Dr. Kim, those who test positive for COVID-19 on a rapid antigen test are further required to take a PCR test to verify their infection. Now, some are questioning the need for this double verification. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think ideally, just the PCR-based method is kind of still the gold standard, because it is very sensitive. It what it means, the sensitive is that it can also detect some fragments of even simply speaking some dead viruses, not even the infectious anymore. But then this rapid antigen test is basically detecting the proteins of these viruses. So then the sensitivity is way lower than lower than that of the PCR test. So if we can somehow replace some PCR-based method with the rapid antigen test, that's kind of ideal. But the fact is that we cannot actually achieve such kind of a sensitivity. But there are some problems. There are some potential combination in between the rapid antigen test and the PCR test. If they are both positive or negative, which is very good and a very good correlation. But if the antigen test is negative and the PCR test is positive, that's kind of we can tolerate. And also we have to actually determine how sensitive those antigen test is. But the real problem is that the antigen test is the positive, but the PCR is negative. This is so-called false positive. So in this case, we can actually very wrongly just make some prescription for this negative COVID-19 patient. This is actually just a waste of our resources and also the drugs that we already have. And I think there are some concerns among some expert groups about this sort of especially false positive due to some rapid antigen test. And then the people also just suggest that there may be some validation needed. So there is some validation to just confirm what kind of correlation between the RNA copy number, which is actually detected by the PCR test and also the rapid antigen test. And then also whether the currently using this rapid antigen test also very effective also against the still just emerging variants. It's especially also including the stealth Omicron as well.
Right, I see. Professor Yu, what do you recommend meanwhile to address staff shortages within the medical arena amid the rampant spread of Omicron?
Well, this is also another type of the real life. Our hospital, the staffs and the doctor, we decided to keep the government regulation 7 days. But other hospitals did make the shortage in the 5 days. So the people are worried about it. In scientifically, the 5 days quarantine ourselves and the wear mask tightly, yes, there will be no problem to see the patient. The problem is medical professional also human being. So Omicron variant, some are just passing through a mild, like a catching cold, but someone is different, suffering the sore throat, difficulty breathing, aching whole body, and exhausted. Actually, the people are complaining that right after the 7 days quarantine measure, and then there are no power to go work. So yes, we worry about the shortage of the medical resources to see the patient, but you know what? Medical professionals work in the medical arena. We do our best to protect ourselves. We knew how to protect ourselves very well, but at the same time, we living among the common lives. We are catching. So is no one blame about this. But anyway, if we are under real crisis, we should be shorten the term. But don't forget it. Medical professional also is a human being. We have to have a rest enough for 7 days to restore their energy back to the medical arena.
Right, of course. And personally, as a doctor, speaking as a doctor, Professor Yu, what are your thoughts on shortening the quarantine period to 5 days or 3 days for healthcare workers?
Well, I'm negative about it. Why? Because the people worries. So it's kind of common sense if the people who didn't know, because my doctor having the 5 or 3 days have a rest, but patient, they didn't know why they have a break. For kind of just short break, to wedding anniversary, the trip, we don't know. But we have to announce the patient because they have to know. But we did it? Not. We did not. So that's why better to keep the 7 days course enough, because 5-7 days later, very less chance of transmitting from the medical profession to the patients. So that's why better to keep the rule in the common the same.
Right. Dr. Kim, I believe we previously touched upon this particular issue, but do you see the recent ease in social restrictions, including the extension by 1 hour to 11 p.m. of business hours, that is, at dining and drinking establishments, as well as the lifting of vaccine pass requirements at certain establishments, as aggravating perhaps our current outbreak?
I think that the outcome is pretty much just obvious, but then I'm not quite sure to what extent it will just affect this kind of the dining, just the facility, these avenues and the cafes. Mostly people just with a mask. And then just the dining, mostly just staying on just open mouth. And also after some drinks, people tend to be just a little bit relaxed, and then just less careful about some very just common sense, just hygiene. So that this somehow will just contribute to just increasing the number of just the total total number of just infection cases.
Right, and keeping in mind what Dr. Kim has said, Professor Yu, how do you respond to government efforts to further ease pandemic-related restrictions in the near future?
Anyway, we have to get through the new planning, because we cannot live with COVID regulation for our life long. So anyway, how to ease and step down this regulation is very difficult. But first of all, we have to open for visiting Korean passengers, because kind of ridiculous that, so they are, we know what, Omicron variant crisis, Korea is most crisis in other countries, but the visitings and travelers into the Korea, they have to be stayed in 7 days to quarantines, and also they have to do 2 times PCR test. So it doesn't make sense. Why? Even though Koreans who are 7 days the quarantine, no, we didn't recommend the PCR test for the release. So this one is one of sample. We have to think one by one. So how many people gathering? Yes, we have to easing, but time restriction should be easy first. Why? Because it's a time restriction, yes, it's very difficult to control it after the midnight, but we know how to handle it for the last 2 years, being educated how to handle it this moment. So we have to be controlled first. So entering, inbounding the travelers regulations, and second is for time limited should be least easy restriction first.
Right. And staying with such restrictions, Professor Yu, what are your thoughts on the possible idea of perhaps getting rid of face masks within the academic arena? Would that be an option?
Well, academically, very good point. For me, probably from now on for long, medical professional or some very high risk region should be wear a mask. Like probably is kind of regulations set by the government could be. Why? We knew that this is virus transmissions can be fatal for someone. But in region why it's a hospital and the very high risk region and the groups, it can be transmitted and at the same time they're fatal. But in general, outdoor activity from 1st of May, when the weather is better and Omicron variants crisis coming down under the water, so probably easy restriction for the take off the mask from the 1st of May, I highly recommend it. But indoor, depend on the place, they have to put the different regulation. For example, to the 학원 for private tutoring system, better to keep to the wear mask in this year in public tutoring system and school as well.
Right. Dr. Kim, reservations for booster shots have reportedly fallen amid the suspension of vaccine pass requirements. What can be done to boost the uptake?
Well, I think we actually have some dining facility now. We are not actually requesting for some vaccine requirement. That I think, in fact, somehow just make some of the people's just motivation is just less now motivated to get some booster shot and also the people are concerned about potential adverse effects. They might have just already experienced the series of the vaccination as well. But then I think to just encourage them just the booster shot, I think they need to get just better informed. Now the primary series of vaccination is not just 2 shots, it's a 3 shot. This actually just remind me of the some hepatitis B vaccine, and then now there is some scientific evidence to support these 3-shot programs. Well, actually, just last year there was a kind of some controversial debate whether the booster shot. Now we actually regard this as the 3rd shot of the primary series. Is really just helpful or not? But now just more scientific evidence is accumulating. And then now most of the experts now agree that now the 3rd shot is somehow just increase the immune. We actually just more generate just a better response qualitatively and quantitatively. And then also, well, actually, instead of just the 3rd shot, now just scientists think maybe the longer interval is probably better than the 3rd shot. But our just in some clinical trial for vaccine was we could not actually wait for some 5 or just 6 months after the 1st shot. So our just primary design, the original design is the 1st shot, then 3 or 4 weeks. That this is the actual kind of some very shortest interval between the 1st and the 2nd shot. So then the giving just people some protection. Then later 5 months later, then the 3rd shot. So that you can just generate some best just protection against the COVID-19. And then the one thing that we also have to the people have to just very well informed about the long COVID. Somehow just people just neglect the some effect of long COVID. There's a long COVID is some kind of symptoms even after just 4 weeks after the symptom onset. Some people, even after recovering some acute COVID, they actually just suffering from the many different kind of symptoms, even like a hair loss and then cognitive just failure, and then some many kind of the symptoms. And then we do not know the reason for that, but the thing that is for sure is that the vaccination actually just helped just to reduce the risk of the long COVID right now. And then other than that, if this is kind of some vaccination part, but for others, we can probably, our government maybe just more the oral drugs just available for the potential just the infection cases. So those kind of things that in our side also government can do for just the upcoming also just the current just Omicron surge right now.
Right. Professor, your early voting this past Friday and Saturday led to much discomfort for COVID-19 patients who were forced to wait in line outdoors for quite a while, as my colleague Song Cho mentioned earlier. What do you propose to avoid a similar scenario on election day?
Well, actually, I was in Saturday. I did
early voting.
Yes, I early vote. I did it. So I intend to visit 4:30 p.m. because I want to see what's going on exactly from 5 to 6. Because from the beginning, I'm negative to the time, the double with the patients and the ordinary people same time. But fortunately, 9th of the March is election days. We are proposed to the patients who are infected, they would do they do their response and their right from after 6 p.m. to 7:30. The problem was, you know what, both, there are 4 simple principles, but most important thing is secret ballots and direct votings. But it was not happening. It was not happening. So probably this is the management of the voting systems will be changed. So I believe the same voting system and should be keep the security and the privacy of all the people in the equalities should be. But I believe that today they have the debate about it to announce the correction. I believe we would do well this 9th of March.
Right, better planning for the 9th then. Dr. Kim, those who have tested positive on a rapid antigen test but are waiting for their PCR result, as of election day that would be, will be allowed to partake in regular voting. What are your thoughts on the safety of this measure?
Well, obviously there is some chance of transmission to some other uninfected people. So then I don't know what the governments would just implement other some measures, but I think the best way is that the separating just those people in time and the space. But if it is not available, maybe just keeping distance among the voters are just the best way, and wearing masks and keep a distance at least 2 meters just apart from among people. And among not only these people, there might be some other asymptomatic some COVID-19 patients. So for this kind of people, we need to just keep a distance among these the voters in the line.
Right, so that would be the best response, and keeping your distance and wearing your face mask.
Sure, of course.
All right, Dr. Kim, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Yu, thank you very much for your insights today. Right, well, we are counting down to Election Day, which is slated for Wednesday this week. So do take care of yourself to ensure that you can partake in the presidential vote. Thank you for watching.
When the lantern of wisdom and mercy lights up, a traditional cultural festival unfolds.